when you work in sustainability, you obviously need those lighthouse programs that really defines the organization that you're in and is really connected to the strategy. But you also need to think about how do you work it into all the processes to really make sure that you get a culture which is led by sustainability. Some of the wicked problems that we are facing, climate change, biodiversity, there's not one actor that can solve those problems alone. You need the innovation power of the private sector to find some of the solutions. You need the regulatory framework of the public sector to make sure that we all go in the same direction. You also need the civil society to back it up. So I think the future really calls for each company should find out what is their contribution. They can't solve it all, right? All businesses should find out where can they make the biggest impact, and then they need to integrate that into the core of their business so it doesn't become like an add-on. Getting the data right on the impact of sustainability is super, super important. The legislation on greenwashing has also really been tightened. So you can also say the risk of talking about sustainability has increased if you don't have the data to back it up. Looking at some of the more challenging parts of my career, it has probably been in the organizations where I felt it has not maybe moved fast enough. So I think the worst thing you can do in your career is...
Welcome to FemLead, the podcast on female leadership and role models. This show aims to inspire and equip you with the tools you need to navigate your career plans. FemLead brings inspiring career perspectives and strategies to guide your path to success. Your host, Alexandra, will interview role models on new, exciting topics with each episode. If you like what you hear, give us a review and subscribe to the show on your preferred streaming platform. Enjoy.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of FemLead Podcast. I'm Alexandra, and today we're going to talk about regenerative leadership and sustainability. We have a special guest. Her name is Annemarie Meisling, and she is a visionary leader who stands at the forefront of sustainable business and organizational development. Her career included influential roles at Hansen and Novo Nordisk, where she worked on integrating sustainability into the core strategies, as well as engagements with the World Bank and COWI, focusing on sustainable development. Beyond her professional roles, Annemarie has held leading board positions in key think tanks and industry organizations, including DI, Danish Industries, and the United Nations Global Compact, scoring her commitment to driving sustainable practices across various sectors. Currently, she is a partner at Koral, her new business, and she is dedicated to using the power of organizations to regenerate society, the environment, and leadership styles, demonstrating her belief in the transformative potential of businesses to create meaningful change. We're going to talk a lot about what does it mean to be a leader and what does it mean to lead with sustainability in mind. And we're also going to talk about how to be net positive when you leave work. So I hope you enjoyed this interview. And of course, as always, give us your review and your feedback in our channels. Hello, Annemarie. Welcome to FemLead Podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here. How are you today?
Oh, I'm wonderful, especially being on your podcast. I've really been looking forward to that, Alexandra. I think it's a really, really inspiring podcast you have.
Thank you so much, Annemarie. It's really a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for accepting our invite. We are going to talk about a super cool topic, and we're going to talk about sustainability as well. And I want to start by asking you to give us a little bit more context when you look at your career, because your career spans across various sectors, international platforms, you led companies, and you also worked in some very cool large organizations. So what inspired you to pursue, if I may say so, a pretty diverse and impactful career path?
It's funny you say diverse, Alexander, because it's true. I've been working in many different sectors, international organizations and national organizations, but the red thread has always been sustainability. So that's what I have been doing my entire career. Very early on, I found out what I wanted to do, which was sustainability, and that is really what I have pursued. So I started my career in the World Bank, and here the focus was really on international labor rights, but still within the sustainability area. Later on, I was more like a consultant within that field. Then I took a similar job in pharma in Novo Nordisk, where I was working on responsible supply chain. Then in biotech, where I had the full responsibility of sustainability, also in the building industry. And then now I started my own company, Koral, which is a consultancy company within sustainability. So I think I have touched upon every element within sustainability, from climate to biodiversity to the social areas, and also in the governance space, but in many different sectors.
That's super interesting, and I'm happy you've mentioned that it was a focused career, because I think that a lot of our listeners are wondering, how do I find, what is the red thread of my career, especially if I'm interested in building a career that has a focused theme. And in the beginning, maybe you don't know, you knew that sustainability is something you are interested in from an early age and from the early stages of your career. But when you look at, how you found this focus, is there like a moment that solidified or that recognized for yourself the fact that you have a commitment towards sustainability and leadership and sustainability working together?
Yeah, I think I started when I finished the law school. I mean, I really felt that was not my thing. I wasn't completely tuned into what I wanted to do. And then I heard of a law firm that was actually working with human rights in the private sector within what was called CSR back then, and I thought that was super super interesting. So I pursued that direction, even though I had no idea where that was going to lead me. But I think that was following my heart somehow, right? And then I think one of the really kind of, or maybe I should say, like. One of the defining moments was when I was working in the World Bank, which is where I came to later. And first, I was working in the World Bank with more traditional development assistance, working with the public sector in labor rights, and it was challenging. It was difficult. And then later on, I moved to more private sector development. And I just remember that one time where I was standing in one of the factories that had been part of our program in Lesotho, a small country in Africa, where I could really see the difference that our program had made for the factory workers. And I think that was really where I tuned in, where I found my niche, that using the force of the private sector to create a change in the settings where they are, that really turned me on. And that was when I said that was kind of my passion in life, was to unleash the power of the private sector to make a difference, be that in the social area and the environmental area. But for me, that moment back in Lesotho, where I saw the change that you could actually have even on the factory floor, that was very, very powerful.
Very, very cool. And when it comes to, in a way, incorporating the principles of sustainability into your leadership approach, you talk very, I'd say, optimistic and positive about the importance of actually working in this field as well. You're very passionate about it. Otherwise, of course, you wouldn't have built such a strong career in this field. But when it comes to integrating this sustainability approach and all the considerations that have to do with having sustainability at the core of your career path, how do you integrate that in your decision-making process and maybe even in the organizational culture now that you are also building a new business yourself?
Yeah, so I think for me, it has been kind of two different things somehow. So one thing, for the first 10 years, I was working as a sustainability specialist, I would say. So this was really about, making impactful sustainability programs, but also working on integrating sustainability in the processes in the organization, be that in the innovation process, in investment conversations, in HR practices, and so forth. So I think that's a field in itself, to really make sure that when you work in sustainability, you obviously need those lighthouse programs that really defines the organization that you're in and is really connected to the strategy. But you also need to think about how do you work it into all the processes to really make sure that you get a culture which is led by sustainability. So I think that is a really, really interesting field, and that has very much to do with the specialist field of being a sustainability leader. And then later on, I would say that I became myself a leader, and I became a leader of leaders because I had a team which was not only sustainability, but I was leading a team also of communication, of public affairs, of branding. So, sustainability was no longer the only thing I was going to be focusing on, but my core focus was really leadership, right? And that was also, inspired by your question before, saying a defining moment where I kind of really had to think about, how do I actually integrate sustainability into my leadership? What does that actually mean? How do you become like a leader that is ensuring that you foster a sustainable environment? And that has been something that I've been then working on for the last many years.
And a big part of your career you also spent at Christian Hansen, is that correct?
Yeah, so I was 8 years in Christian Hansen until about 3 months ago.
Okay, yes, and actually, Christian Hansen's recognition came in 2019 as the most sustainable company in that year, and I think that's a pretty remarkable achievement. And I wanted to ask you, since you were at the time also part of the organization,
Yes.
what strategies and initiatives did you champion during your tenure there, and how do you think it contributed to this success of the company?
So as I said before, in Christian Hansen, we aligned our corporate strategy with our sustainability strategy. So instead of having two strategies, we had one. So we did have those lighthouse programs and projects that really defined the company, food waste, for example. And then we also, as I said before, really spent a lot of time integrating sustainability into all the relevant processes in HR and innovation and global operations and so forth. So all of that was really important, and one of the reasons why we got taken into consideration. But I think what really made the trigger for us winning this recognition as the world's most sustainable company was that we had spent about a year or so putting data on what impact we had with our core products. So really spending a lot of time on saying we had identified 9 impact categories where we wanted to make a difference. And then we actually took our entire product portfolio with more than 3,000 products. And then we identified how can we measure that we have an impact on these categories where we want to have an impact. And then we were very rigorous in the way we measured it. And so we obviously also had external assurance on our measuring systems, so it could be validated. But I think that was the key thing, to really be very ambitious on the data level and the validity of that data that gave us that recognition, combined with the fact that so Christian Hansen is a biotech company, and it was combined with the fact that I think the world was slowly starting to understand the power of good bacteria, of microorganisms, of what it can actually do to replace pesticides, to create a healthy gut, to extend the shelf life of dairy products, for example. So it was a lot. It was a lot that went into that, the recognition. But I think the key thing was really also to get the data right.
Great, thank you for that insight. I think it was really a highlight for me to ask you this question, because of course, as a leader in sustainability, being part of that recognition, I think it's a pretty big achievement. So congrats on being part of being recognized as the world's most sustainable company and leading the way. It's really, really remarkable, honestly.
Oh, thanks for saying that. And it's never one person's job, right? Or it's never one person's achievement. So I think when we got that recognition, it is really an attribute to those about 3,000 employees in Christian Hansen at that time, that they had really also embraced the topic, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Kudos to the team. It was a great moment, and I think it still is for the company to go back in time and remember that.
Yeah,
and
thank you.
I wanted to ask you, given your experience and expertise in public affairs and branding, how do you then navigate this intersection between corporate interest and business interest in general? You mentioned that the private sector was a big focus for you, but then also the societal values, especially when we look at how complex and interconnected the world is today. How do you merge these two worlds?
Yeah, and I think these two worlds are interconnected, right? I think a lot of bad things have happened, you can say, by believing that the private sector is outside the interests of the public sector, or that the environment is not the responsibility of the private sector, right? I think that there is that recognition now that some of the wicked problems that we are facing, and that is, you can say, climate change being one of them. You can say biodiversity coming up as a challenge that we now see could even be bigger than the climate change challenge we're facing. There's not one actor that can solve those problems alone. I mean, you need the innovation power of the private sector to find some of the solutions. You need the regulatory framework of the public sector to really make sure that we all go in the same direction. You also need the civil society to back it up, right? So I think the future really calls for us to have systemic solutions to some of those really challenging problems that we are facing, and we need to do it together.
And when you look at the current setup and how we need to work together, in your opinion, what role do then businesses play in addressing this pressing issues globally? And here we can mention climate change, human rights, something you are very familiar with as well, and also the transition to circular economy that is going to be, and it is, but it's going to become a more prevalent subject also in society that people will actually know more about. How can then companies integrate these considerations in their strategies?
But I think this is really the core of what sustainability is, right? So I think that each company should find out what is their contribution. So each company should find out, so they can't solve it all, right? I mean, for some companies, let's say within the building industry, the circular economy is really, really relevant because they can maybe use building materials that is a side stream for something else. So that should be their core. For other businesses, it would obviously be climate change because that's core to their business. So I think all businesses should find out where can they make the biggest impact with their products or their innovations, and obviously also where do they have the biggest responsibility, right? And make sure to address that. So I think for businesses, it is really important to find out where can they make their impact, and then they need to integrate that into the core of their business so it doesn't become like an add-on. And I would say all of the big companies are really great at that currently. I mean, I think that they are far in integrating sustainability into their core strategies, while you can say 5-10 years ago, it was more something that was in the communications department. It was something that was more ad hoc. And we don't see it like that currently. I really see companies being great at integrating it into their core. And then I should say we've also seen in the EU the legislation really pushing for the companies to integrate it much further, right? Now all companies and large companies in the EU have to make what is called like a double materiality assessment, where they assess the impact that they have on the world, but also the impact that the world or, climate, for example, will have on the company. So I think here you have some really ambitious legislation that will make sure that the companies, at least in the EU, work much more solid and strategically with the topic.
I happen to, excuse me, I happen to at the moment work on a similar topic. And this legislation update is really something interesting because we see it more and more, not necessarily enforced, but at the end of the day, it is going to be enforced throughout the chain. And it starts with large companies because it is definitely the way to move forward with, also with setting role models and examples of like how things can be done, because large companies have more resources. But I think in my opinion, I think in Europe, we're leading the way on how legislation should be made if we want to achieve our our SDG goals and our climate goals. And I think for the next 10 to 15 years, it would be very interesting to see how we tackle this topic further, especially in legislation, and how legislation is implemented, not only in large companies, but also companies who right now have other problems to think about, but in time they would basically be founded on the basis of how can we make sure we're a sustainable business to begin with. And I think there's a couple of industries that do that, but I think in the future, at least in Europe, we will see more the push to really consider this from the beginning. And it's a very interesting industry to be in, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very impressed with the legislation coming out of the EU, right? Because they are actually really putting force on the private sector to work much more systemically with their impact with regards to sustainability. And there has been a lot of pushback from the private sector, actually, because they thought it was too big of an administrative burden. And I think it can be if you don't take the opportunity to work with it strategically. So I think those companies that just added to, you can say, merely as a compliance exercise, it's a missed opportunity if they don't take the opportunity and integrate it into their strategy and see how they can actually ride the wave of a regulation here instead of being overwhelmed by it. And then we will obviously see that it starts with the biggest companies and then it will trickle down the value chains. So even if some of the smaller companies will not be required to report in a couple of years, they probably will be asked by their customers to provide the data to them. So I definitely think that for companies in Europe, getting the data right, and it's kind of leading back to our conversation from before, that getting the data right on the impact of sustainability is super, super important. And we should also remember that one of the other things that has happened in the EU is that the legislation on greenwashing has also really been tightened. So you can also say the risk of talking about sustainability has increased if you don't have the data to back it up.
Absolutely.
So I think, my recommendation would really be to think about how sustainability is integrated into the core of the business, but also start getting the data right so you can also talk about what you do.
Fantastic. And great advice coming from a sustainability leader like you, because I think, if people, we're going to talk about Koral in just a second, but I think, if people want to get the right angle to how to integrate sustainability in their core business, they should definitely follow what you do, because what you're sharing here is definitely the core also of your now company, but you've also seen it for the past years in practice, integrated, implemented. And I think it's probably you're smiling every day thinking that this is your day job, because you are obviously very aware of all the different layers to how sustainability will play out. And I'm happy that this is a topic that has become so important, because it is, it is our livelihood in a way. If you think about where we are and how we work every day, and how we have a responsibility to take care of the planet beyond what we learn in school. It's something bigger than just the few steps we can take. So it's a very cool, honestly, industry to be part of, and I'm sure you really enjoy it.
I do, and I can tell you, so I've been working in this for 20 years, and I can tell you when I started, it was really small. Right? I mean, it was really something that I did because I felt it was the right thing to do, and I was super passionate about it. And I think in my career, I have always followed what I'm really passionate about, right? And then you end up making a difference because you really do it, with all your heart and soul, like you do with your podcast, right? I mean, you end up producing something that's good. But so I always felt it was super, super important and relevant. But I can tell you in the beginning, 20 years ago, it was not something that companies took that seriously. It was something that was, in the corner of the business. So for me, it has been mind-blowing to see the change in those 20 years from being, a little department in the corner of the business of very passionate people, but without much influence, to be honest, right? To being now people working in sustainability. They are often kind of in the center of the business because they're involved in almost every part of the business, from sourcing to production to innovation to branding to marketing and so forth. So now they are really in the epicenter of the businesses, those that are, for example, sustainability directors around the company. So it's been really great to see that that's the way the world has been going in that space.
That's great. And also a good, I say, takeaway for the listeners, if they consider a career in sustainability, that now it's actually the time is going to flourish even more. And we should probably keep an eye on how the industry is evolving, because it is the time now to actually be part of it. And I do want to ask you, moving forward towards your very extensive leadership career, I have so many questions about your leadership philosophy, but I wanted to ask if we can start by perhaps describing a more challenging situation or episode that you've encountered throughout your career, and how did you use your leadership skills to overcome it?
So I think obviously some of the more challenging things have been being also in organizations where I felt that it didn't move as far enough as I had hoped, or as fast as not enough as I had hoped. But looking at some of the more challenging parts of my career, it has probably been in the organizations where I felt it has not maybe moved fast enough for me. And I think for me, it has always been important that instead of being very critical about where you are, or, ending up being a little bit cynical about your role or the company, I think it is just about recognizing, well, maybe the time is not right for that company, and then you move on. So I think the worst thing you can do in your career, at least this has been for me, is sitting around being cynical because something around you is not following the way you think it should be, right? So I think that is really about then you move on to something else, where there are people that can see the potential of what you do, or have a bigger understanding of, for example, what you think is important. So I think that's a key thing, right? Move yourself if things are not moving fast enough. And then I would say that some of the challenging things in my career is obviously always having to let go of people. I think that never comes lightly, and I think the more mature I get in my leadership, I really understand that you cannot take that seriously enough, right? Making sure that when you onboard people, that's a huge task in order to get the right people into the organization. And when you offboard people, you have to have the belief that you do it in the best possible way, where they grow more when they get outside of the organization than when they were in the organization. So I think for me, the essence of what I have called regenerative leadership or sustainable leadership, for me, that has really been about how do you make sure to really grow people around you, even those that are in your organization or those that are not in your organization, but really trying to find out how do you make sure that that you have what I call like a net positive impact on the people around you or the environment around you.
Fantastic. And to follow up on what you've just mentioned, which is regenerative leadership, can you maybe give us a little bit of an understanding of what does the concept mean and how do you advocate for its adoption in organizations?
Yeah, so it's a kind of a new concept. You can say it's a concept that is building on sustainability, but probably taking it to the next level, right? So if sustainability was about, let's say, having zero emissions from a CO2 point of view, all right, having zero accidents in your work environment, the regenerative thinking is trying to turn it around, saying, no, you have to strive for having a net positive impact on the environment. So even if it's really ambitious, you should actually strive for thinking about how could you as a company actually not only reduce your CO2 impact, but actually take out the CO2 impact and end up having a positive impact, right? From a CO2 point of view on the environment. It could also be biodiversity. So the thinking is not only doing less harm, but actually trying to think about how can you do more good. That could be from an innovation point of view. or it can be from a process point of view. But I think that's the core, not thinking how you can do less harm, but how you can do more good. And I think that also comes to your own organization, right? So you should not strive to have a culture where you have less sick days or less accidents, right? You should really strive to have a culture where people really grow, that when they leave the organization, they are bigger persons than when they came in, right? Or even down to the very day design. I think you should strive to have a day where at the end of the day, you actually leave the office with more energy than when you came in. I recognize that you can be tired, but you need to have a culture where people are not drained. And I can sometimes be surprised, because the core of our companies, that's people, right? That's their ability to create the value that we all live from. So really taking it seriously, how do we make sure to have employees that really grow and have more energy at the end of the day than in the beginning?
And that's such a great message to share for leaders listening as well, that you just mentioned something super relevant, which is aiming to have less sick days in the team setup, or less people that tell you that things are not working, and more people saying this was a fantastic day at work because we did so much and it seems like we're progressing, or it seems, like you said, regenerative. You're going there and you feel like something is moving forward, and kind of recognize that it's also maybe sometimes a mindset shift,
Yeah.
of how people see their work. And I mean, it would make such a big difference for many teams, but I think also for organizations to recognize it, it would be really, really impactful in everyday interactions. I mean, if everybody knows that we want to get more out of this than give, in the sense of energy, we want to do something that is less draining and more empowering, then if everybody aligns on that, it would be also a better workplace, right? And people would stay, retention would be there, and all of that. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, and I agree that it's a mindset change. And actually, when I was in Christian Hansen, we after we came back from Corona, we had a very kind of rigorous way to work with that in the team that I was leading, where we really spent full year trying to find out, so individually and in the smaller teams, what actually gives you most energy, and really trying to then make a day design and a week design that actually really catered to that specific team. So I was very inspired by those that work, for example, on a 4-day work week. Basically, we're trying to say, what are those techniques that makes people so effective they can, for example, only work 4 days a week? And then we tried to implement some of those. But we also really went a step further to saying, what is it that gives you energy? Also recognizing that could be very individual from person to person, but really taking it very seriously, because we wanted to be sure that people, at least in this inspiration, it doesn't mean that it's there every day, but the aspiration should be that you have more energy by the end of the day than when you came in, because you thrive at your work and you feel that you accomplished something, and that you feel that you have grown, and that you feel that you have made a difference, and that you feel that you have colleagues around you that care about you, right? And that you feel you want to do something extra for those colleagues. And I think that's where you start creating really powerful teams that can really lift. But it starts with really taking that, you can say, building the team very seriously, and also focusing on that core of regenerative leadership.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Very, very good example. When it comes to now stepping into a little bit of the opportunities for businesses and our audience here to learn from your experience, what do you see as the most critical opportunity and challenge? So opportunities and challenges that we should be aware of for businesses aiming to make a positive impact on society, but maintain their competitiveness and profitability as well.
For companies?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think, as I said before, I think companies should really find out what is their core, and what, in the challenges that we are facing as a society, where can they really make a difference? So I think that should be the core focus, like find out where can they really make a difference, and then find out who can they do that with, right? Because we are in the world of finding systemic solutions. So I think recognizing that they can't do it alone, and then finding the partners that can go there with them. I think that's really where I would recommend companies to go.
Fantastic. And when it comes to your now new business, because I think we should definitely not end this interview without mentioning Koral and what you're building now. You decided to build your own business. So I would like to ask you first, why?
That's such a good question, because I've actually always loved being in those big companies. I think at one point, it's really about development. So I was really maybe challenging myself. What would be the most intriguing thing? And that would not necessarily stepping into another leadership role, a step further up. All of that would be interesting. But I think for me, I was really intrigued by the fact to create my own organization. I was really intrigued by creating my own culture, experimenting more with regenerative leadership from the start, you can say. And so I started having those thoughts, and I knew that it would be within sustainability, since that has been kind of the passion and the love of my career, combined with the other things I've done, but that has been the red thread. So at one point saying, now it's time for me to create my own organization and take the leadership position there. And then doing it with some partners that I really, really enjoy working with. So not doing it alone, for me, that would not be the right thing. But creating it with these two partners that I have has really been amazing. And we've had such a good start that I am so happy about, that I hardly can express, actually.
That's fantastic. And also, what a good message to send, that at some point, if you're an experience building your own setup, consider having the right partners, and also consider your passion for the subject, so your chances of success increase exponentially. And of course, you have your 20 years of experience with you, but at the same time, starting from scratch is never easy. So it also comes with a little bit of imposter syndrome for some of us. It comes with a little bit of, okay, will this be successful in the long run? So I think just taking the leap is already a great win. So congrats on starting. It's a new business. So I look forward to following it along and hearing about these great updates.
I will make sure to share it, Alexander. But I would say the way we do it can maybe also inspire some people, because it was not something we just jumped into. We had a very structured process in over 6 months, these 3 partners that we were planning to do it together. And then we had these evening workshops where we had, we really went into the deep dive of saying, okay, what products do we think are relevant? And then we went out and asked some in our network, do they agree with those products being relevant, right? Then we looked into how should we structure our own organization to be sure that we, as 3 partners, that we were aligned. So I think we spent quite a lot of time on, before we took the decision to go, where we really worked through what products should we deliver, what should be the financial structure, what should be the governance structure, getting feedback from the market, really talking about the culture, what kind of culture do we want to have, how do we see it. So I felt that when we then pushed the button and said, now we do it, it was almost, putting those things into action that we had planned for quite a lot of time in many late evenings.
Fantastic. And it also gives an understanding of how you can plan your, in a way, exit to something new. Because I think sometimes we assume that we need to completely stop what we're doing to take a break and then restart. But actually, if you already know that there's something coming and I'm actually planning towards that, I know this is the next level, let's make it structured and let's make it, feasible for the market, and ask other potential target audience members, what do you think? I mean, it's a very structured business modeling approach where you actually go out there and you do interviews and you get your feedback, right? And I think it can inspire a lot of people, like you said, to not necessarily wait for that moment of like, okay, I've had enough, or okay, I need a break to rethink, but rather use what it's your passion and your network and start testing ideas that could potentially turn into something bigger, because you never know.
I agree. And I think you should try to, I mean, for me, also the older that I get, I think leadership is really about knowing yourself. I mean, that's where it all starts, right? So I think you should try never to be there where you all of a sudden can't stand it anymore. All of a sudden you need to quit your job and not do anything. I think it's about really sensing yourself and knowing yourself and finding out, well, where do I want to be in, not like in 1 year, but where do I want to be in 5 years? And that's actually one of the good leadership advice I once got from my former CEO, when he said, don't think about your next career move. Think about where you want to be in, 5 years or 10 years, and then try to position yourself to go there. So I think, the best advice is really like know yourself, and then find out if you feel that something needs to change, then you spend some time with yourself trying to find out what is it that needs to change, right? And then if it's a new career, then you start, maneuvering yourself in that direction so you don't burn out and then you need to change. I think that's not the most sustainable self-management, even though I recognize that a lot of people use that method, if you could say it like that.
And the question, I must have is, why do we wait? And I think there's something there about self-management, like you said, and maybe potentially proving something by staying, as in I can go through this, so I'll just stay here and suck it up and hope that in a half a year, without me doing any change, something else from the external world will change. And I think there's something there about stop waiting for that and rather do small but incremental changes to your current setup to not end up being completely done. Yeah. I don't know if this is the right way to end it, but I'm very happy you've mentioned also the other side of the coin when it comes to thinking about your own management of energy and potential, right? At the end of the day.
Yeah, and I think that has probably also been the red thread through my career, right? That I have always gone the path where I felt that I myself got a lot of energy, right? Mm-hmm. So I feel I have been more inner, inner driven by my own passion. Even in the beginning, I can tell you, no one really thought it was very cool to work on this CSR thing, right? They felt it was a waste of time. It couldn't lead to any career, right? And I don't know if I thought it could lead to any career, but I just loved it. So I think for me, that has really been the red thread, that really be less controlled by the outer sphere, but be controlled with what you feel is the right thing for you. What gives you energy? What turns you up? What makes you jump out in the morning? What makes you want to read that extra book or do that podcast, in the late evenings, because you just feel that it's so interesting. Mm-hmm. And if you go that way, you will end up creating the most amazing career for you, right? Where you feel that you really learn something throughout life. And in the end, that has to be the driving factor, right? That you yourself feel that you develop that life that you want to have. No one else can do it for you, right? And it's that needs to be driven by your own inner belief of what makes sense for you.
Absolutely. And thank you for that, Annemarie. I think it was a very nice ending note here. Before we move into the final 5-fire questions, I want to take 2 minutes to ask you a little bit about your recommendations for us. And then we're gonna say goodbye and thank you for this fantastic time together. So the first question from the Fire 5 is, what is one book that has influenced you profoundly and you think everyone should read?
So for me, it was Reinventing Organizations by Frederic Laloux. That was an amazing book. When I read that, I started to understand, wow, you can really lead organizations in a completely different way. It doesn't have to be, command and control and strict hierarchies and silos. You can actually lead really successful organizations by having a stronger focus on people, by having a stronger focus on purpose, and by ensuring that you have a net positive impact on the surroundings. So I would recommend that book for everyone.
Fantastic. Can you share the best piece of advice that you have ever received?
I mentioned before, I think that was a good advice. Don't think about your next career move in a couple of years. Think about where you want to be in life in, like, say, 5 years or 10 years, right? So that's what you should run for, not just for the next 2 years.
Very, very well said. When it comes to role model, who is for you your role model, and what qualities or achievements do you admire in them?
But this also comes back to what we said before, because I would say what I admire in people is when I can see that people are turned on by that inner fire in what they do. And then it doesn't matter at all where they are. But when I can see that a person being a gardener just loves what he does and can share the passion for, I don't know, growing vegetables or whatever they do, that's really what turns me on. Those people that have found their inner, are living their dream or found their inner core, that's always been super, super inspirational for me. And that's something I've always tried to also look for in my own career. And I've met a lot of people that have found it, but it comes from all kinds of different careers and different sectors.
There's different people to meet as well. And when it comes to your other career option, if you were not working in sustainability, what would you be doing?
And that was the most difficult questions of all the questions that you have, because seriously, I have always done what I wanted to do. So it's really difficult for me to think about something outside of that. And I'm not sure I have a good, quite answer for you, because that is what I would do. I think I need to come back to that. Maybe learning how to surf or something, but that's not really a career, right? That's more like what I want to do in my spare time at one point.
You can definitely be a professional surfer if this is.
Yeah, but that's not a career path. No, that's just, no, actually, I think that, some people have this dream that, I just wanted to do my own flower shop or something like that. But I've never really had that, because I think that would not be challenging enough, right? So I think that being in that space where you actually professionally work with something you believe in personally, that's just really powerful for me. And I think I found my path. So I don't have a lot of other niche dreams. I'm not opening that coffee shop in Italy or something else. I will leave that for other people.
Okay, but that's fair enough. And our last question, Annemarie, today is: if you could swap roles with someone for a day, who would it be, and what experiences would you hope to gain from it?
But that would actually be swapping roles with someone that was working in regenerative farming, because there's now a development within what's called regenerative agriculture, which is, you can say, really working with biodiversity and soil health. And they have these practices that they work on in their lands. And I would love for one day just to understand how is it actually that they do it differently from what we do today, or in the more traditional way of doing agriculture. And I would also like to take the lessons from that to say, okay, thinking more holistically in how the land is working, how can we use that in our organizations? So that was a good one. Thanks for reminding me of that.
Interesting. Very interesting. Thank you so much, Annemarie. I hope you had fun today. This was our interview, and thank you so much for all your advice. I'm sure that the listeners will have a lot to think about and hopefully implement in their career as well. So thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you, Alexandra. It's been such a pleasure to meet you, and you have really shown the way, I think, with this podcast, and really giving women, but also men listening in, really great advice. And I love listening to your podcast. So thanks a lot for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Annemarie. And yes, men do listen to the podcast. So hopefully more of them will also continue to do that, because it's a team effort here.
Of course.
Thank you all for listening today, and stay tuned for more interviews with inspiring female role models.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of FemLead Podcast. Share the news with your friends and follow us on social media at FemLead Podcast everywhere.